it doesn't count as snow unless, like, you can build a snowman, okay? That's when it's reached snow capacity. So that means it's been a long time since it snowed. But good to see everybody here tonight, and excited about just this opportunity for us to focus on love and on marriage and what that looks like, whether you've been married a year or 50 or 60 years, always room to grow and learn and improve. And so I benefited a lot from this morning. I was just, I told Carla when he tore that picture, we'd have had more people here tonight if at that moment she would have stood up and just walked out, Just walked out the back, shaking her head, and then, to be continued, come back tonight to learn how to reconcile. And but I'm excited about tonight and just about learning about marriage and love and all that. So why don't we pray at about the halfway point, maybe a little bit past the halfway point. We'll have about a 15-minute break, go over and have some refreshments and stuff like that. But we'll have a couple of different sessions tonight, and I hope both of these are a blessing to you. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll start. Father, we're thankful tonight for an opportunity to grow and to learn. And Lord, we know that you mold us and you shape us through marriage and through learning about one another, learning love, learning repentance, learning forgiveness, that whole process and what that looks like. And you shape us and you mold us through that. And so, Father, I pray tonight that we would learn how to love better and deeper, and in so doing become more like you. As we saw this morning, we love because you first loved us. And so, Lord, I pray that we would have the strength to comprehend, as Paul said, the love of Jesus Christ. And so, Lord, teach us tonight, show us tonight your way and your truth in your life. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
I think that you guys got juked by the weather. It turned out to be sunny and 42. You thought, oh, man, we're going to get a day off of school tomorrow and off of work tomorrow. And
thank y'all for being here, really, because honestly, you left the Olympics, you left your warm house, and you came out into the cold. And so, wow, kudos to you guys.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we're going to try to have some fun tonight, as well as open up Scripture and look at it. One of the things before we even begin, I want to say thank you to Pastor Jared. We have been so impressed with Jared and Sarah. You are blessed as a church to have that young man. He is unbelievably talented and gifted, and the whole entire staff. Yes. I guess you came here a couple years ago. Was it a couple years ago? And I was working at the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor, and he came to one of the first gatherings of the year that we have, and he left, and I just thought, man, that is a sharp young man, young pastor, and we're fortunate to have him in this community. And then he's assembled some of these staff were already here, like Daryl, and you know how talented he is, and then you get a hold of a guy named Kyle Shipp. And Kyle, just back at University of Mary Hardin-Baylor, he did a devotion when we did these Monday morning devotions every week, and Kyle did this deal, and it was the best one I've ever been to. And afterwards, I walked up to him and I said, "Have you ever thought about being a pastor? I mean, that was really good." and was it the next day or so? He goes, he comes into my office, and we didn't really even know each other at that point very well. And he comes into my office and says, "Yeah, about that question you asked me about being a pastor, I've kind of been struggling with this." And then I got to have a front row seat to watch what God was doing in his and Tiffany's life, and then got to pray with him, and actually got to be and give the charge at his ordination service. So I'm huge Kyle and Tiffany Shipp fans. I know you guys have watched Tiffany grow up and be around this church for a while, and then you get Kyle's humor all the time. So I want to introduce
Jacqueline. Give a shout out to Jacqueline.
Yes, and Jacqueline and Nathan went through our marriage prep class, UMHB grad. Man, what a great staff. You guys, this is fun to be here for us. I want to introduce our family to you real quick, and this first picture is of our son, Bo. We'll tell you more about Bo, but that's Bo when he was 2 years old. That kind of describes his personality, just full of life, maximizing everything. And when Bo was 2 years old, the next slide, shows when he was diagnosed with cancer, and he went through 2 years of cancer. Carla told that story a little bit later, and don't worry, he didn't get cancer from smoking cigarettes. That Carla's mom smoked cigarettes, and he put that in his mouth and had that hat on, and we thought he was the Marlboro Man at the time. And but when Bo was diagnosed with cancer, just 6 weeks before he was diagnosed with cancer, God gave us this beautiful little girl. And Brittany, if you could order her out of a Land's End catalog, she was just beautiful. I mean, dark hair, dark eyes. I mean, she looked just like her dad. She loved the same foods, chocolate cake and all ice creams and all that stuff. And Brittany is just just the most compliant, sweet. That's just kind of Brittany. She's there and she's having fun. And then God gave us this next one. Little Casey came along 5 years later, and Casey loves animals. She is the class clown, the funny one, the typical third child that comes along. And so this next picture, Casey and Carla convinced me to get this dog. And this dog kind of took on the same personality as Casey. And Casey would always dress this dog up, put glasses on it always, and stick her tongue out at us and all that stuff. The next picture here is, if you fast forward, and our kids started, and they went some way from 2 to 18, like really, really fast. Any of you have kids? You know what I'm talking about? I mean, that's like a time warp where it goes, and some of you in the middle of that, you're like, oh, no, it doesn't go fast. Bo, when he was 18, he'd gone through an awful lot, and that's Bo. And then this next picture is Brittany, and she got her first cell phone, and it kind of changed her life and changed the dynamics of our kids when they got cell phones, kind of changed their dynamics of life. And then this next picture is Casey. Now then, this is an important picture to show you because Casey came along about the time Facebook came along, and if you can see right to her left, that's my shirt. But she cut me out. That was her profile picture, and I got cut out of the profile pic. And so that kind of, those of you who have teenagers, you get that. I mean, you completely, you buy them everything, you get them the cell phones, and then you get cut out of the profile. I haven't understood it. If you keep going, Casey married her high school sweetheart. We had 2 weddings within 6 weeks a year and a half ago. And Casey's was first. She's our youngest. And she married a Salado boy. They both went to Baylor. And her high school sweetheart, that when we moved here, she was kind of didn't want to move, didn't want to be a part of this move. And then a year later found her, which now her Bo, her sweetheart. So, and then Bo, the next picture here is of Bo and his wife. He met her in Hong Kong. She's from upstate New York. And Julie and Bo actually live on Lake Belton right now. And then Brittany, our daughter, is living in Austin. So Casey, our youngest, lives in Waxahachie. Bo lives on Lake Belton. Bo and Julie live on Lake Belton. And then Brittany lives in Austin. And all of them are serving the Lord. Some of you may know Kobe Spears, Keith and Tanya Spears. That's their son. Keith had a car dealership in Belton. So we got rid of the dog. We got rid of the cat. Then we got rid of the dog. And then we finally talked Bo into quitting smoking. And so that's kind of the Weathersbee family and our lives and kind of how we have lived. We have a fun family. It's made the 33 and a half years of marriage very eventful. And as you know, those of you who have children and those of you who may not, children can really put a stress and put stress on your relationship. And yet at the same time, they can be such a huge blessing. And just as we talked about this morning, I think the dynamic relationships that are ever changing force us to our knees to acknowledge we need a holy God. This next slide on the Psalm 139, some of you know this psalm as "Search me, Lord, know my heart. Try me, Lord, know my anxious ways." The Message Bible, Eugene Peterson says it this way, and this is what we would want for the next 2 hours as we're together. "Investigate my life, O God. Find out everything about me. Cross-examine and test me and get a clear picture of what I'm about. See for yourselves whether I've done anything wrong, then guide me on the road to eternal life." I really think that Psalm 139 from the Message could almost be a depiction of marriage as well. Marriage has a way of investigating our life. God finding out about everything deep within us. He knows, but it becomes real to us when we see the mirror image of the into me see. And as God cross-examines us and tests us in this marital relationship, he gets a clear picture of who he is in our life and who we are. And it becomes less of Byron and more of Christ as we were created. I'm going to go run the PowerPoint.
Okay, right. So as Byron said, we've been married 33 and a half years, and we don't come as, I don't know if I need this, if I have this. What do you think? Okay, keep talking. So as Byron said, we don't come as marriage perfect people, the marriage experts. We come as fellow strugglers. We trace through several years of our marriage right there as he was describing our children. But we have had some hard things happen. We have been to counseling 3 times. I just want you to know that we have struggled, just like some of you may have struggled, and our kids have struggled. And so it's the struggles, though, that help shape us into who we are today. So when I first met Byron, we were both at Baylor, and that's where we met. And he was going to be a funeral director when I first started dating him, and he was going to go back to Rotan to run the family funeral home, the Weathersbee Funeral Home in Rotan, Texas. So, when you're dating somebody, you're like, oh man, could I see myself as a funeral director's wife living in Rotan? Almost a deal breaker, but I'm glad I stuck it out because God called him into ministry. So we spent 12 years in youth ministry, and we were on staff at Emmanuel Baptist for part of that time when we were really young, like 25. We had no idea what we were doing. And then we had our first child. So 5 years into marriage, our son was diagnosed with cancer, and Byron saw that, and there's a picture of him. There he is. As you already saw that picture earlier, we had a 6-week-old baby at the time. We were living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they found a tumor on the base of his bladder. So they had to do chemo and radiation for the first 6 months. And I know in a room this size, some of you have probably had very sick children or known someone that has gone through an illness like this, but it was devastating to us as 27-year-olds at the time. We had no idea, what was coming for us. And the diagnosis at first was really bleak, and we didn't know if he was going to make it, but they had to take out his bladder and his prostate the first 6 months. The tumor wouldn't shrink anymore. So he lost his bladder and his prostate. So he has had a lifetime of surgeries. And I remember going to a conference, and Elizabeth Elliott was the speaker. This was shortly after he was diagnosed. Our world was turned upside down. We were devastated. We were going through so much, and we didn't know if our lives would ever be the same. And, our son had lost his bladder, and, it was just a bad deal. And she was speaking in Oklahoma City, and my husband knew I needed help. And so he's like, go to the conference. We'll hold down the fort. And one thing she said at the conference was that trials and pain and disappointments and difficulties are God's chariots that he sends to take us to heavenly places. And at the time, I was like, oh, it feels like a steamroller. This trial feels so different than that. But I will tell you that during those 2 years that would ensue, we would see God in ways we had never seen him before through the tragedy and trial of that deep suffering. And out of that came just a deep love for the family and a deep love for the church, because we could not have made it without those 2 institutions. And I think during those 2 years, the seeds of Legacy Family Ministries, which is the ministry that we began that is still going today in 1995, was born out of that suffering. And as you're sitting there, I'm sure that you can testify that some of your greatest ministry has come out of your deepest suffering. And that's just how God does. He doesn't waste any of our sorrows. He calls us into those places. He heals us and he redeems us, and he meets us in such a deep and profound way that it changes us forever. So I'm not really here to talk about cancer and all the struggles and trials of that, but I will say that those 2 years were very defining for our family. And we started Legacy with this mission statement: to pass on biblical principles from one generation to the next by deepening the roots of students and developing the foundations of engaged and pre-engaged couples, so that we can encourage busy families to make family their priority. Because as Byron mentioned earlier, our families are under attack, marriages are under attack, And the culture does nothing to help us out, right? All our kids are going a million miles an hour. Sundays are not protected anymore. The culture is just not conducive to closeness in your marriage, right? It's pulling at us, and it's hard to keep our marriages strong in the culture that we live in, and we have to make it a priority. So I want to just take a minute really quick. I know this is going to be really quick, but I want you guys to share your story. And what I want you to share with a couple around you, just turn to one other couple. And for those of you who are far away from another couple, just slide over or something. But I want you to share how you met and what is one lesson that you have learned through marriage. What is one lesson that you have learned? So if you want to just find someone that's sitting next to you or sitting one other couple and just talk about those things, how you met and what is a lesson you have learned in your marriage. Okay, let's turn back. So I could see the terrified look on the fellas' faces when I gave y'all that little thing to do. They were like, oh, why did I come today? I'm going to have to talk to someone. But that wasn't so bad, and don't worry, you're not going to have to share the deepest parts of your soul. Don't worry. Don't walk out. I promise. It's not going to get bad. So I just think it's so awesome to hear people's stories. It's especially when you go to church with people and you don't really even know, like, how did that couple ever meet and what's their story? So when you think about marriage, a healthy marriage isn't something that you find, it's something that you make, right? And you have to keep making the marriage over and over and over and over again. And some days are really harder to keep making the marriage, right, than others. Some seasons are really harder to keep making the marriage than others. It requires a great deal of commitment and a great deal of sacrifice. And I think of the definition of sacrifice as the forfeiture of something highly valued for the sake of something or someone that's of greater value. And we work with engaged couples, and they're like, sacrifice. Oh, it's so easy to sacrifice. We love each other. And they just can't even imagine, like they're on top of each other in our house, and it's just crazy. And they don't think that anything's a sacrifice. What could ever be a sacrifice? I just love you so much. And so sacrifice is when you see this person is so highly valued, you're willing to give up whatever it is that is of more value. It could be anything. It could be your hobbies. It could be, my desire to try to make my husband eat like I want him to eat, as you heard this morning. It could be tangible and intangible ways that we sacrifice, that we give something up for the well-being of the other person. But you know what happens? The longer we go in marriage, the less we value this person sitting next to us. And the more we value those other things out there, because it's just so hard, because we see this person sitting next to us, and sometimes they're not very nice. And so it can get really hard. And with the pressures and the demands of daily life, we begin to take each other for granted, right? So what was once exciting becomes this predictable routine. But I'm kind of preaching to the choir because y'all are here, right? It's the people out there. And so we take each other for granted, and I want to share with you the 5 stages of a married cold that can kind of depict this for couples. So year 1, this is the sweetheart that has a cold, and this is their interaction with each other. Year 1, baby darling, I am worried about that sniffle that you have. I've called the paramedics to rush you to the hospital for a checkup and some rest. I know you don't like hospital food, so I'm going to bring you your favorites each night. Year 2, sweetheart, I don't like the sound of that cough. I have arranged for Dr. Johnson to come make a house call, which this was written a long time ago, because who really makes house calls anymore? And some of you younger ones are like, what is a house call? I don't even know what that is. So let me tuck you in bed. Year 3, you look like you have a fever. Why don't you drive yourself down to Walgreens and get some medicine? I'll watch the kids. At least year 3, he's going to watch the kids, right? Year 4, look, be sensible. After you've fed the kids, cleaned the kitchen, and washed the dishes, you really ought to get to bed. Year 5, this is the best yet. For Pete's sake, would you stop coughing? I can't hear the TV. Go in the other room. You sound like a barking dog. So who's had the flu right now? Who's had the flu? Anybody had the flu in here? All right. So sometimes when we get sick, that's what the hardest thing in the marriage, because the wives are like, you're just a baby, you need to suck it up. And it can just be so challenging. So to keep making the marriage, it requires sacrifice, it requires commitment, and it requires keeping the value of your spouse so high that this person is the priority person in your life no matter what. And so when you get married, you come in with a lot of expectations, right? I know I had my own, and some of them are realistic, and some of them are unrealistic. Let's just be real. And some of you have to think back a long time ago when you were getting married of what some of those expectations were. A lot of times we come into marriage with a consumer mindset thinking this person's going to be really great for me. Like they're going to meet all my needs. They're going to just think like I think. That's what I expected Byron to do what I wanted him to do, to think like me, to be just like me, to jump through all of my spiritual hoops, to eat the foods, that I wanted him to eat. And I thought he should work out with me the way I like to. All these expectations. He should talk to me. He should always know what's wrong with me. I should never have to tell him. He should always know that how I like the house. All of those things. And I know guys have their own set of expectations, whatever they might be. She's a much better, she'll be a great cook. All the things that guys like, I don't even know. So we thought we were so much alike. And one of our, I thought Byron would also like rake the leaves the way I wanted. One of our biggest fights ever, and it still recurs, except we got a yard boy, and now that solved that. But whenever the leaves would fall, I would want him to go out and rake up all the leaves. Well, he's from West Texas, as you all know, and there's no trees in West Texas. So to have leaves on the ground is like amazing, because that means you have some trees. Well, I'm a Louisiana girl, and so we had tons of trees, and it was just a beautiful thing to rake up all the leaves. My dad, it was a family outing. My dad would rake the leaves up. We would jump in them. We'd rake them up. It was lots of great memories, and then he would take his cigar, and he would light the leaves on fire, and it was just really fun. And I thought this was a fun thing for us to get to do. Well, Byron did not have that idea, and so I would say, hey, when are we going to rake up the leaves? That was not a good thing to say. He's like, you never get out there and rake up the leaves. So it was like a big fight every time the season rolled around and there were leaves. So I think that you guys may fall into that, where your family did it one way, and I was raised doing it this way. Well, I was raised doing it that way, and it can just become this clash. And I learned that expectations equals unplanned resentment, right? So the more expectations we have, we're going to resent that person if they don't do it like we want them to do it. If they don't talk to us, if they don't ask us how we're doing, if they don't do X, Y, and Z. So the expectations are so huge. Is there anybody in the room that would shout out? I mean, we're close here, right? Y'all have already met each other. You've already shared your story. What would be some of your unrealistic expectations that you had going into marriage, or an expectation that you're like, oh, wow, that was crazy?
That I take the trash out every week without fail.
Okay, take the trash out every week without fail. Okay, to go to sleep. Yeah, those are good. Come on, any more? Oh, yeah, for it to be quiet when you read. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Didn't happen. Yep. So you can see how there's these male-female things, but there are these family of origin things that you learn growing up. And so you have all these expectations, but then you get married going into it, and you make this covenant, like Byron mentioned this morning, and you stand at the altar and you promise to walk the pathway of life together, right? It's a shared identity. It's I and me becomes we and us, and it's a solemn binding agreement. And you promise to walk it all together. And you did not get married just to live two separate lives in a house, sharing the same bank account, sharing the same bed, but miles apart. You did not get married to do that, right? But sometimes it's easy to find ourselves there. And we never knew that our walk would include, our journey through 33 years would include childhood cancer, would include a child with learning disabilities, would include junior high lock-ins as a youth minister, church scandals, been in plenty of those, starting a ministry together, the joys of walking your or performing your children's weddings. I didn't even mention that slide. The joys of serving in ministry together, having adult children that we kind of actually love being around, having to care for our aging parents, and having my mother-in-law move in and take over our bedroom when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, caring for her in her last days. So we never knew those things were going to come in on us. But what is so beautiful about it is God uses all of those things to shape us. And God knew that our marriages would require more of us than we ever thought possible. And that's why he said it's going to be a covenant. And the covenant that you have with each other is going to be based on the covenant that I have with you. And so after you make that covenant, you run into disillusionment, right? So you have these expectations, you stand at the altar, you make these vows with each other, and then you run headlong into the gap between how you thought it was going to be and how it's actually turning out. And Byron mentioned today, he was my knight in shining armor. Then he said about himself, it only took 5 minutes to realize he was the idiot in the metal suit. Well, the reverse could be said about me, Cinderella, maybe, and then the ugly stepsister, 5 seconds later. And our honeymoon was like crazy disastrous. We missed our plane. We ran out of money. We didn't have a credit card. Byron's dad had to wire us money. We were sitting at a restaurant like day 4 of our honeymoon, and Byron starts like putting all pesos. We didn't know we didn't know the count, like it's crazy peso exchange or whatever. And so he just pushes all the money in. He goes, okay, it's time to go. And we're walking down the beach, and I'm like, you're walking so fast. Why are you walking so fast? He goes, because I think we just walked the check, because I just put all the cash we had in there, and that was it. And so the honeymoon started out that way, and I'm so glad that we had the rest of the marriage. It was not going to define the rest of our marriage. So marriage, like no other relationship, will expose your heart and demand your growth. And I like what Tim Keller says about it. Marriage is like the Mack truck driving through our lives, revealing our flaws and humbling our reactions. Because in dating, the difference is added spice and created attraction. But in marriage, it becomes an irritant because we accommodated it in dating, but now we have to go home and live with it in marriage. And so I remember when Byron and I first went on our first date, we went to play racquetball, and I beat him in racquetball. And he was like, I like her. She's competitive. But what he didn't realize, I became competitive about everything in our marriage. I'm more spiritual than you. I can think better than you. I'm always right. Don't even tell me I'm wrong. All those things. And so this competitive spirit flew over into the marriage. And I know that I liked Byron's strong will and his independent thinking when we were dating. Then after marriage, I was like, you're so cynical. You're so critical. Why do you have to think through everything? Why can't we just say yes? Why do you have to think? So it's our natural tendency to begin to define our spouse before marriage by what they are, and after marriage by what they're not. And it's those differences that we were so attracted to in the first place that can become the greatest irritants that tend to drive us to counseling later on. And so I'm painting the picture to say, then there's three kinds of marriages in the room, right? Those who stick, those who feel stuck, and those who simply want to stop. And I'm not talking about getting a divorce necessarily, but maybe you might be in the room and you might be going, this is just way too hard, and I am just done. Like, I can't ever please her. You might feel so discouraged because everything you've tried to please your wife or to please your husband just gets shot down, and you may want to quit trying so hard. You may want to quit sacrificing. You may want to quit being the one that initiates forgiveness. You may want to quit having sex because it's just not that great anyway. So either you're sticking or you're stuck or you're simply stopped. And we found ourselves in a place where we were stuck 15 years into marriage. We had just gone through a really hard season with starting this ministry. We were 5 years into it, I believe. And we had a lot of conflict around our lives. My sister had moved to town, and that was a hard relationship for me. She moved under a very difficult situation. We were fighting within and fighting without. And so we found ourselves just really at a hard place, struggling to even like each other very much. And so we decided we would go to counseling, and we decided in the midst of that, someone handed us a book. We were doing a family camp in Spain, believe it or not, for some missionaries over there. So we flew over to Spain, and someone was sending a box of books for the missionaries through us. And Byron pulls the books out. We have this long flight, and he's looking at this book, and he's like, why do they send all the bad books to the missionaries? And he starts reading the book, and it's a book called Sacred Marriage. Has anyone ever heard of that book before? Anybody? Okay. So Sacred Marriage is a book written by Gary Thomas, and it really changed the trajectory of our relationship. And so it says, what if God intended for marriage to make us holy more than to make us happy? And that was the book that we read all the way to Spain, and it really helped us to see that what if the difficulty of marriage is not how God designed it to be? Because after all, marriage is difficult because of the human condition, right? We're married to another sinner. And James 3, chapter 2 says that we all stumble in many ways. Believe me, we are addicted to our sense of entitlement, our need for comfort, our need to be respected. And I think both of us were feeling those things, and we were wanting what we wanted, and we didn't like how the marriage was turning out. So we were disappointed with God. We were disappointed with ourselves. We were just so discouraged about it all. And we realized that it was easy for us to lose perspective. So when we read this book, it helped us to see what is God doing in our lives to chisel away the selfishness and to chisel away the pride and the entitlements? Because it's so easy to get discouraged and to simply give up over time. And so how do we keep caring about the marriage when we are married to people, we are two people that are married that we stumble in so many ways. And so how do I keep caring and serving? Because most of us know the how-tos of marriage, but we don't really have the heart to. And our hearts can become so stubborn and so prideful and so all about us and our ease. And according to one marriage expert, John Gottman, 69% of marital conflict will never be resolved. Yeah, y'all are glad you came to this marriage seminar, right? But what it tells us is that we have to look beyond the marriage to find the heart to care. And so I realized at that point that I had to not let my responses be based on my husband, but based on God's love for me. And so I thought of the phrase, one of the things we learned about in the book is that worship preserves the heart. And so as you're proceeding in this marriage, our hearts are so prone to wander, right? And we're so prone to want to be bitter and withdrawn. We're so prone to, for men to feel that they're so disrespected half the time and they can't do anything right, so they just check out. And so we distance ourselves and turn away from each other. But what we realized is, man, God was trying to deepen our love for each other through relying on our love for him, on his love for us. And Jared even mentioned it. We love because God first loved us. So when I say worship preserves the heart, it doesn't really mean going to church and singing songs. It's like setting your mind and your posture of humility and really falling on your knees and saying, God, I cannot do this without you. So realizing who God is and what he wants to do in our lives and how he wants to give us everything that we need to love this person sitting next to us. It changes the soundtrack of our circumstances to something that's better and different. So we're no longer focused on what they're not doing for me, but we're focused on pleasing God and serving him. And I like what Charles Swindoll says. He says, the sanctity of marriage necessitates commitment. Commitment is weakened by human depravity, and human depravity is counteracted by an intimate relationship with God. And if you think about it, our human depravity, Ephesians 4 tells us that in our natural state, here's our thinking pattern. We're darkened in our understanding, we have futile thoughts, and we have deceitful desires. That is apart from God. That is apart from him. That's where our thoughts are going to take us. We don't really understand. We're deceived in what we really, really want, and then we have futile thinking. So all I can do, like Byron can be doing a million things right, all I want to do is focus on the one thing that he's doing wrong, not the million things that he's doing right. And so we have this just negative focus, and it's a deceitful desire, it's futile thinking, it's darkened understanding. But when we change our soundtrack and focus on him and really lean hard into who he is, it's a total shift, and we surrender our rights and we lay them down. So I don't know if you're feeling stuck, maybe it's time to just lay down the rights and just be the first one to say, I will serve you. Because if we see that in worshiping we yield our lives to God and he meets our needs, and we trust that he is the ultimate source of our well-being, not our spouse, then this allows us to be the kind of spouse that is growth-focused instead of problem-focused. A spouse that says, I am here for you instead of you are here for me. A spouse that says, I will love you unconditionally instead of conditionally. I'll love you if. Because you're taking this love that God has given you and you're putting it on them. Assuming the best in them instead of assuming the worst in them. Seeking opportunities to serve instead of wanting to be served, and choosing to understand rather than being understood. And then saying, Lord, change me instead of Lord, change him. And all the ones that we read at the first page, those are the supernatural responses that do not come naturally. So as we yield our hearts to God, as we wake up each day and we make it our goal, God, satisfy me with your unfailing love. That is when our hearts are set right and we can serve our spouse. They're not natural responses. It's an agape kind of love, not based on the feelings. And that's what Valentine's will tell you. It's this romantic feeling thing, and that's all good. But I'm talking about the kind of love that will deepen your relationship, that takes a marriage through. And then there's beautiful, beautiful things that come out of it instead of all the natural responses. And it takes time and it takes perseverance. And then your marriage will start to grow in deeper and deeper and deeper ways. Perseverance is something that God highly prizes. So maybe some of you are feeling stuck in the room. Maybe some of you are feeling like you want to stop in the room. And maybe some of you are sticking, but you just need to bump it up an extra level to make it a really special marriage. But I like what James 1:4 says, perseverance must finish its work so that you can be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. And so to trust that God will give you what you need to keep making the marriage, to say yes, to be the one that serves, to be the one that loves, and to realize that what you're doing now has huge, huge impact on your kids and on others watching. And so I like what the poet says, Goethe says, that which matters most should never be at the mercy of that which matters least. So is what you're investing in now going to matter 10 years from now? And what do you want people to say at your service, right? And your wedding, at your funeral. No matter where you find yourself, sticking, stuck, or stopped, there's always hope, right? The gospel message says that none of us have what it takes apart from him. We're all broken and weak and flawed, and he gives us Jesus, like Byron mentioned today, to take the broken pieces and the shattered dreams and the struggling relationships and to put it all back together. He sees every sacrifice that we make, every reaction that we have. He sees it, and he will reward us in the end. He promises us that we are in a 5-minute life, and we're going to collision in a collision course with him, and that it will be okay one day. There will be no more marital fights, no more money problems, no more children that are wayward. Whatever it is that cringes in on us, it will all be made right in the end. So can we not learn to love well while we're here for this short time? And I like Matthew 6:33 says, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, then everything else is going to be added to you. We get so focused on the wrong thing. And when we seek him first, C.S. Lewis says, when first things are put first, second things are not suppressed, but they're increased. And God's story is so much better than the smaller stories that we try to build. And I think about a snapshot of our marriage probably happened about 8 years ago. Do you ever have those times in your marriage when God peels back the window and he lets you see, okay, you are making progress here. And he gives you just a window a day where it all works right, or where you have a response. You're like, wow, didn't know. I didn't blow up then. I didn't try to control and manipulate. God is doing something through all the struggle, through all the perseverance, through all of what we say yes to. And this happened for us. I saw this picture it's probably 7 years ago. We were doing a wedding in Longview. Byron was doing the wedding, and we lived in Salado, and I was going to go by UMHB and pick up Byron on our way out of town, and it was my job to get the clothes out of the closet and put them in the car, and he was the minister performing, so I had to get his suit. He was going to perform the ceremony. Well, Saturday morning rolls around, and Byron's like looking for his suit, and it's like early, so he was like making sure he had all of his stuff, and the wedding was that night, and he goes, did you remember to get my suit? And I was like, oh, I did not get the suit. And I was just so frustrated at myself, and I couldn't believe I forgot it. And he, instead of getting mad, which would have been, us 20 years ago, it would have blown up. He would have been, well, I told you the one thing I gave you to do. And then I would have reacted and said, well, you should have gotten your own suit. Or I would have cried, and, it just would have gone really poorly. So you know what he did? He knew that Saturday morning was a window that I needed to study for this Bible study I was leading, and we had kids, and it was just crazy, and I don't know, that was my window. And so you know what he did? It was pouring down rain outside. He called our daughter, and our daughter met him halfway, and he got in the car, and he drove, and he did not get mad. He knew that was important to me to be there in that hotel room studying, and he just took it, and he went and did that and said, it's okay. It's not a big deal, because I was like, let's go to Dillard's and buy a suit. No, we don't have the money to go to Dillard's and buy a suit. I'm going to drive and get the suit. And when he came back, I was just so blown away. I was like, Lord, you have done something, because this did not end so poorly. You have changed me. You have changed him. And I want to tell you that lean into Jesus. He is enough for you, and he will give you what you need to keep making the marriage, And don't just be a religious person that comes to church. Be all in and let him use your marriage to make you more like him. I love this quote, and it says that if there's righteousness in the heart, there's going to be beauty in the character. If there's beauty in the character, there will be harmony in the home. If there's harmony in the home, there will be order in the nation. And if there's order in the nation, there will be peace in the world. And it all begins in our heart. Worship preserves the heart. And your heart is so important, and that's what flows out into your marriage. And God is at work in our hearts. And I want to encourage those of you in the room to keep persevering. It will be worth it in the end. And keep pouring into your marriage and let God teach you how to love. So I think we're going to take a little break now. Byron, do you have something else? Okay. You guys are awesome listeners. Thank you.
Before we take a break, there may be some of you might have some questions for Carla. If you have some questions.
Or Byron.
We'll open this up for a little Q&A, and then we'll take about a 15-minute break, and then I'll give you some more instruction. But any questions that you might have that this session? Great. You did a good job.
No.
So if you... Okay, so come on in. You're going to need a piece of paper, a spouse, and a pen. And go ahead and stand in your aisle. Your spouse. This is a tough crowd. Just get to where you can see the screen. That's the only... Get the best one.
Hey, you still owe us a weekend in Bellmead.
Y'all won it, huh?
Yeah, we won. Every time we drive through Bellmead, we're like, that night.
You know, I think I may just give y'all a night in Bellmead just so I can say I did, so those other couples go, well, you've never done that. So go ahead and stand up. You're going to need a piece of paper, a pencil or a pen. Get a piece of paper, a pen, and your spouse, and stand in the aisle of where you can see the screen. Okay, you're gonna, as you come in, go ahead and stand in the aisles. And if your spouse is here, get with your spouse, preferably. Get with your spouse. Get where you can see the screen. And we're going to have the women give instructions and the men are going to draw. Okay, so does everyone have a piece of paper? Well, let me back up. Does everyone have a spouse that you can draw with? And then you need a piece of paper, and you need a pen or a pencil. We don't do that here. Okay. Well, when they show up, we'll let you jump in. So here's the instructions. We got some people trying to trade spouses. But what's weird about it is it's not trying to trade for another guy. It's like, hey, me and her could do this better than we communicate a lot better. Okay, so get where you can see the screen, and the women need to be able to see the screen, and the men need to be able not to see the screen. Okay, so get back to back like this right here. You're going to get like this where Carla can see the screen and I cannot see the screen. So the man needs the piece of paper and the pen. He's going to draw what the lady gives him instructions. I'm going to put something on the screen, ladies, and then you're going to give him instructions. Now this is a communication exercise, but it's a safe experiment. We don't want to create any fights. So the women are going to give instructions. Women are going to give instructions. Men are going to draw. And you're going to have 3 minutes. Now here are the rules. Important that you hear the rules. Here are the rules. Men, if you can see like through the reflection of the glass or that mirror back there, if you can see the screen, you're cheating. So don't get where you can see the screen. Ladies, you're going to be able to give him instructions of what you see on the screen. He's going to write it down, and you're going to have 3 minutes. Now then, you can ask clarifying questions, but ladies, you cannot turn around and look to see what he's got on the paper. You just have to keep your eyes on the screen and continue communicating to him. Men, you can ask clarifying questions, but you can't turn around and see the screen. All right? This first time, you're going to have 3 minutes to do this safe exercise. All right, you ready? Men, quit cheating. All right, ladies, you're going to communicate that right there. Ready? You have 3 minutes. Go. Good timing, Daryl. Okay, you have a minute and a half. You're halfway through, minute and a half. One minute. You have 1 minute. 30 seconds. You have 30 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. How'd you do? Turn around and compare notes. Stay standing. We're going to reverse the roles in a minute. Okay, now remember, this is a safe experiment. No fighting, no competing. That's a bi-directional mic, so it'll pick you up. Okay, now then, we're going to switch this around where men are going to give the instructions and the women are going to draw. And we're going to change the rules up a little bit. Okay? So instead of 3 minutes, you're going to have 1.5 minutes. Okay? So men, get where you can see the screen. Ladies, where you can't see the screen. Men, you're going to have to give them instructions of what's on the screen. And we're also going to change the rules where, ladies, you cannot ask any clarifying questions, and there can be no verbal or nonverbal communication. In other words, you can't like hit him 3 times and that means yes, or tap his head and that means no, or no nonverbal or verbal. And again, this is a safe experiment.
No eye contact either.
Same rules apply. You can't, men, you can't turn around and see what she's writing. All right, here we go. Ladies, quit cheating. All right, here you go, men. Oh. Hang on. Hang on. There we go. All right, you have 1.5 minutes. Ready, go. You're halfway through. Thirty seconds. $15, 10, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. All right, stop. How did you do? You can go ahead and go back to your seats and compare.
All right, head back to your seat.
Hey, Jared. As you're going back to your seats, hey, Daryl.
Hello.
Can you give Carla that mic?
Okay, so let's talk about this safe experiment. I just want you to talk to me about what were some things that made it difficult to communicate with this safe experiment? I could not talk. Yes, you couldn't clarify. So how does that say in real life? Oh, sorry, I'm yelling in the mic. You couldn't clarify. So in real life, we have to ask clarifying questions, right? If we don't really understand. Because how many times when we are trying to get the message across and we're need to listen, but we want to just automatically throw down the gauntlet instead of saying, is this what you really meant? Like, what do you mean by that? Can you explain more? So clarifying questions. What else made it difficult? Okay. Yeah. Right. So the way you
That
perceive
never
what
happens
they're
in our relationship where our perceptions are different.
so
I
the
don't
way that you're understanding it has a very different image in your mind and how they're describing it. Super frustrating when you're trying to communicate, right?
I said I had to do it twice. I said, draw a sun with 8 rays. I mean, a circle with 8 triangles. And it never came, she never got that.
Okay.
Because I'd already said one thing, and then I changed it real quick.
Okay.
I described the same thing.
Yeah.
And actually thinking that you're helping her.
What'd you say?
Draw this, and then I described how to draw it, and she never.
She never switched over. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Details are important.
I guess we cheated because I told her I may tell you to do the same thing 2 or 3 times, but using different words to help give you additional information.
Oh, you told her that beforehand? Oh my goodness, that is so smart. So you told
But you
her.
did cheat, but that's okay.
But it's about, again, it's about expectations, about, okay, I'm going to tell you maybe 3 different things to get the word, get the thought across.
Describing a single image, but I'm going to tell you the characteristics of that image with using different words.
Okay.
Fill in the blanks. From what I omitted the first time, maybe I got it right the second or third time,
Okay.
which is pretty typical.
Oh, yes, background noise and hearing other people. So, describing their. Yes, okay. So that's another thing that undermines marriages is comparison. When you're comparing your marriage to someone else's, and you're comparing your wife to someone else's wife, or your husband to someone else's husband, then you can't really focus on building your marriage, and you're listening to other people and also the distractions. When you're wanting to say something to someone, focused, undivided, clear attention given. Turn off the TV, let go of all the other distractions and focus on hearing. And I heard, what? Turn off Facebook. Put down the phones. Put down the phones.
These little guys are here to help us communicate, but they really cause.
Yes, we struggle with that so much. That's a huge thing. Very, very good. And I recently heard a speaker say, to be fully present to you means that I must be prepared temporarily to be absent to me. To be fully present to you, I must be prepared temporarily to be absent to me. And that is hard for us, right? Because we want to be about us and what we want and how but isn't communication so much more about listening than it is about speaking? Listening to understand, not just listening so they'll finish so you can go do your thing. It's really choosing to put their needs first and our needs second. That's super hard. So when we think about communication, there's a great book called Fighting for Your Marriage. And we love it. We love to recommend it, and because it's based on research. And this psychologists, social researchers, they studied 150 couples for 12 years. That's a long time to study 150 couples of the same couples, and based on how they manage conflict and the patterns that they saw, they could predict with 86% accuracy which would stay and have satisfying marriages and which would divorce. So they saw patterns in these couples over those years, and the patterns had to do with how they managed conflict. So it wasn't how much they loved each other. It wasn't, how awesome their personalities were. It was conflict. Conflict is huge, and you have to be able to manage it. So the 4 patterns that they saw were withdrawal. Think of the acrostic for weenie, W-E-N-I. Withdrawal, escalation, negative interpretation, and invalidation. Those are the 4 destructive patterns, and we have some of those in our marriage. I'm a withdrawer, and Byron's an escalator. And I also negatively interpret everything he says. I just think it's more negative than he really meant it, you know, and those are really tough. So we're not going to describe how to short circuit those, but that book is awesome, Fighting for Your Marriage. We just wanted to highlight it. And communication is so huge. It's the lifeblood of the relationship. And the Bible says that death and life are in the power of the tongue. With our tongues, we can praise and build up our spouse, or with our tongues, we all know, right? We can destroy each other. And we say things that are so mean that we wish we could take back, and we can't take it back. So it's just a very huge, crucial, vital part in our relationship. And I love this saying. So one of the things that makes it hard to communicate is the differences in men and women. So women, we can say something and our man hears it another way. So for instance, when a woman says, "This place is a mess. Come on, you and I need to clean up. Your stuff is lying on the floor. You'll have no clothes to wear if we don't do laundry right now." That is a pretty clear message. I'm sure none of you have ever said that to your sweetie, right? So here's what a man hears.
And you ladies think message sent is message heard, right? I mean, every guy should get what you're saying. But
here's what the man hears. Blah, 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 blah. Come on. Blah, 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 blah. You and I. Blah, blah, blah. On the floor. Blah, blah, blah. No clothes. Right now. All goes back to sex, right? Yes.
oh, that's too good. And you just stole my notes. There's some interesting statistics that part of that study that Carla was talking about, a guy named John Gottman was the one who had a foundational study about that. And from his research, he found that he could observe couples and watch them in just the startup of how they navigate just the beginning stages of conflict and how they start up. He got to where he could predict with very much 90% accuracy of they'll be able to resolve it and manage it, or this is headed to disaster. And then people found, they followed this University of Denver study up that Carla was talking about. And a harsh startup will destroy a marriage. And so again, that's a whole nother seminar, but again, a great book that helps you to short circuit that, because here's what the third study found, and that's why they wrote the book Fighting for Your Marriage. And I think there's a Christian version out of that too, but it's not near as good as the secular version. There are Christian people who wrote it, but when they started trying to make it for the church, it missed its translation. But what's fascinating about that